The control room went dead silent at 3:47 a.m. In 28 years of refinery work, I'd never seen every safety system fail at once. That's when you know people might die. I stood there watching the main control room screens flicker and die one by one 180 workers on night shift, suddenly blind to what was happening in a facility that processes 50,000 barrels of crude oil every day. The shift supervisor jogged over, sweat already beading despite the Gulf Coast morning chill. Wade, the whole safety management system's locked up. Nobody can access anything. Process controls down, emergency protocols down, even the basic environmental monitoring. He paused, catching his breath. What the hell happened? I knew exactly what happened. My name's Wade Garrison. I'm 54 and I've been working this Texas refinery for 28 years. Started as a maintenance engineer right out of the Navy. Worked my way up to chief safety engineer. Yesterday morning, they locked me out of my own systems. Today, they're learning what that actually means. Let me back up. 28 months ago, our parent company dropped a $1.8 million safety overhaul project in my lap. The facility was hemorrhaging money from OSHA violations, EPA compliance issues were stacking up, and corporate was making noises about shutting us down if we couldn't turn it around. They gave me full authority to redesign everything. Safety protocols, equipment placement, emergency response procedures, the works. I didn't just reorganize the systems, I rebuilt them from the ground up. Studied every potential failure point, every hazardous material interaction, every emergency scenario. This wasn't just another corporate project for me. Back in the Gulf War, I lost 2 guys in my engineering unit because someone didn't check the equipment properly. Equipment failure, they called it. Human failure, I knew it was. That ghost follows me everywhere. Every time I hear an alarm or see a pressure gauge spike, I'm back in that tent outside Basra, watching good men die because someone cut corners. Spent nights here with pressure gauges and clipboard mapping chemical flows like battle plans. The safety management algorithms I developed weren't just regulatory compliance. They were 28 years of knowing exactly how this place could kill you if you weren't careful, plus military training that taught me how to keep people alive when everything goes wrong. The first thing I did was walk every inch of this facility with the operators themselves. Not the supervisors, not the shift leads, but the people who actually handle the chemicals 12 hours a day. George Santos from Distillation Unit 7 showed me how the pressure relief system created a 3-minute blind spot every cycle because sensors were positioned wrong. I could hear it in the pipe vibrations, feel it in the temperature differentials. In the Navy, we called it situational awareness. Here, they called it experience. Lisa Morgan from Environmental Compliance explained why the leak detection sequence was backwards, catching problems that should have been prevented 2 stages earlier. She'd been trying to get management's attention about this for 3 years. Nobody listened to her. They listened to me. Nobody had ever asked them before. I spent 2 months just listening, learning that the official safety documentation hadn't been updated in 8 years, discovering that half our compliance problems came from workers creating workarounds to fix design flaws that management didn't know existed. These people weren't just following procedures. They were actively preventing disasters every single day and getting no credit for it. The redesign took 14 months to implement. We didn't shut down operations. Instead, I created a rolling upgrade system, optimizing 1 unit at a time while the rest kept running. Every change got tested by the people who'd have to use it. Every improvement was explained to the workers before implementation, not after. I walked the units at all hours, checking pressure readings, listening to equipment, talking to operators. My hands stayed busy checking gauges and tapping pipe joints. That's how I think, through my fingers, through what I can hear and feel. The resistance came from middle management, not the floor. Supervisors worried that empowering workers would make them irrelevant. Department heads complained that the new protocols required them to actually understand the processes they managed. The old system let them manage by reports and meetings. The new system required them to manage by walking around and talking to people who knew what they were doing. But the numbers don't lie. Within 8 months, OSHA violations dropped 78%. EPA compliance issues went to 0. Worker injuries fell 45% because the new safety systems made sense instead of just looking good on paper. More importantly, people started caring about their work again. When you ask someone for their expertise and then actually use it, they become invested in keeping everyone alive. George started calling me captain after I helped him redesign the pressure monitoring sequence for Unit 7. The name stuck. Pretty soon, half the facility was calling me Captain Wade. It felt right. These weren't just employees to me, they were my crew. And in the Navy, you don't leave crew behind. Corporate noticed. Other refineries started asking for my protocols. I got invited to speak at petroleum safety conferences. Industry publications wanted to feature our turnaround. For the first time in my career, I felt like I was building something that would last, something that mattered beyond this quarter's numbers. Rosa Martinez, our shift supervisor, pulled me aside one evening after a particularly smooth shift changeover. Rosa's been here 18 years, worked her way up from the floor through pure competence. She knows every operator by name, understands every process intimately, and doesn't waste time on politics. Wade, I've got to ask you something. My husband works construction, been doing it 25 years. He says he's never seen a safety overhaul that actually made things better. Usually makes things worse, more paperwork, less common sense. She paused, adjusting her hard hat. Why is yours different? Because I asked you guys first, I said. Because I listened to Jorge about the pressure systems, listened to Lisa about the leak detection, listened to Pete about the maintenance schedules. The system works because it's built on what you already knew. That's when Bryce Hoffman showed up. Fresh MBA from Stanford, 29 years old, hired as operations director to oversee the final implementation phase. Corporate's idea of adding strategic oversight to my project. Bryce had all the buzzwords: digital transformation, data-driven optimization, streamlined workflows. He also had the new CFO's ear, a guy named Carl Winston who'd been brought in 6 months earlier to modernize our operational approach. Winston came from Wall Street. He believed that industrial safety was just another cost center waiting to be optimized with the right algorithms and dashboards. He'd never worked a refinery floor, never dealt with the reality of managing 180 people who show up at 6 a.m. regardless of whether the safety systems are working. To him, Bryce represented the future, young, educated, fluent in the language of modern business. I represented the past. Old school experience in a world that supposedly didn't need that anymore. Bryce started attending my meetings, asking to review my documentation, wanting copies of everything, just getting up to speed, he'd say. Want to understand the full scope so I can support you better. He was polite, enthusiastic, full of praise for what I'd accomplished. I figured having management backing couldn't hurt. The project was working. Numbers don't lie, and I had nothing to hide. That was my first mistake. Bryce was smart. I'll give him that. He didn't attack my results directly. Instead, he started questioning my methods. In meetings, he'd mention industry best practices that supposedly showed better approaches. He'd bring up articles about legacy thinking holding back safety innovation, always framed as constructive suggestions, never direct criticism. But I started noticing the pattern. Every suggestion involved replacing human judgment with automated systems. Every improvement meant fewer workers making decisions, and more algorithms making them instead. Bryce wasn't interested in optimizing what we'd built. He was interested in replacing it with something that didn't require people like me to understand it. Winston ate it up. Here's this young guy with fresh ideas talking about taking our improvements to the next level. Meanwhile, I'm the old-timer who's resistant to new approaches. Bryce made sure to position himself as the bridge between my valuable experience and cutting-edge methodology. What really bothered me wasn't the corporate politics. I'd dealt with that for 28 years. What bothered me was watching Bryce miss the point entirely. He'd walk the units with his tablet, taking notes about optimization opportunities, but he never actually talked to the operators. When Jorge Santos tried to explain why a particular safety sequence mattered, Bryce would nod politely and then suggest we leverage automation to eliminate the human variable entirely. He didn't understand that the human variable wasn't a bug in the system. It was the feature that kept everyone alive. One evening, I found Bryce in Unit 7 with Jorge, watching the evening shift changeover. George was explaining the pressure monitoring sequence, showing him how the operators could hear problems developing before the sensors picked them up. See, Captain Wade taught us to listen for the harmonic changes in the flow patterns. Jorge was saying, when the frequency shifts, you've got cavitation starting in pump 3. Computer won't catch it for another 20 minutes, but we can hear it now. Bryce nodded, taking notes. That's fascinating, Jorge. But wouldn't it be more reliable to upgrade the sensor array to detect these frequency changes automatically? Eliminate the subjective human interpretation? Jorge looked confused. But what if the sensors fail? What if there's interference? We'd lose 20 minutes of warning time. Well, we'd have redundant sensor systems, backup monitoring, much more reliable than depending on individual operator experience that can't be easily transferred or standardized. I watched Jorge's face change. This wasn't about making things better. This was about replacing him with a computer. After we walked away, Jorge pulled me aside. "Captain, is that kid trying to automate us out of jobs?" I couldn't lie to him. "I don't know, Jorge, but I'm going to find out." 4 months before the final rollout, Bryce requested access to my core safety algorithms. "The board wants to understand the technical foundation," he explained. "They need confidence that our approach is scalable to other facilities." Made sense. I gave him read-only access to the systems. I should have paid more attention to what he was actually doing with that access. Bryce wasn't just reviewing my work. He was studying it like someone preparing to recreate it. He'd spend hours in the system, not just reading the algorithms, but tracing through every decision tree, every conditional statement, every exception handler I'd built in. The way I'd designed the system, every major decision point required human confirmation, not because the computers couldn't handle it, but because in petroleum processing, there's always something the sensors don't catch. A vibration that indicates bearing wear. A smell that means trouble. A temperature gradient that suggests trouble coming. My algorithms were built to amplify human expertise, not replace it. When I asked about his progress, he'd mentioned being impressed by the sophistication and wanting to fully understand the architecture. "Wade, this is incredibly complex. You've essentially created a hybrid system that requires both technical expertise and institutional knowledge to operate effectively." "That's the point," I said. "The technology serves the people, not the other way around, right?" "Absolutely. But from a scalability perspective, that creates challenges. What happens when you retire? What happens if we need to implement this at facilities where we don't have your level of experienced operators?" That question bothered me more than it should have. Not because it was wrong, but because it was right. I'd built something that required expertise to operate. But instead of training more people to that level, Bryce was looking for ways to eliminate the need for expertise entirely. 3 weeks later, he was back asking for editing privileges. "Found some potential optimization opportunities," he said. "Minor adjustments that could boost our results by another 18%. He had a presentation ready, full of charts showing projected improvements that looked impressive on paper. I should have said no. Should have asked to see his analysis first, demanded to understand exactly what he wanted to change and why. But the numbers were already so good, and 18% more would make this project legendary. Plus, Bryce had Winston's backing, and Winston controlled the budget for next year's expansion. I gave him the access. That's when things started going sideways. But so gradually I didn't notice at first. Bryce began showing up for early morning system reviews that I wasn't invited to. He'd schedule meetings with department heads without looping me in. When I asked about it, he'd say he was gathering stakeholder input to ensure smooth change management. The language started changing too. In meetings, people stopped talking about Wade's system and started referring to the operational framework. My algorithms became the safety protocols. The relationships I'd built with workers became stakeholder engagement initiatives. Everything was getting rebranded with corporate speak that made it sound like anyone could have done it. Rosa Martinez pulled me aside one Tuesday after the morning safety briefing. She'd been watching Bryce work, and something wasn't sitting right with her. "Wade, something's off. Bryce has been asking questions about your safety systems, but not normal questions. He wants to know what happens if certain protocols get modified, keeps pushing scenarios where the systems might fail." She lowered her voice. "He's also been talking to people about sustainable leadership transition and knowledge transfer protocols." That phrase hit me wrong. Knowledge transfer usually means one thing in corporate America. They're getting ready to fire someone and want to make sure their work can continue without them. What kind of scenarios is he asking about? Peak processing periods, system overloads. What happens if the operator feedback loops get disabled? What happens if the safety algorithms run without the human oversight components? Rosa paused, studying my face. "Wade, those aren't optimization questions. Those are sabotage questions." That night, I stayed late to check the system logs. What I found made my stomach drop. Bryce had been making changes. Small ones buried deep in complex subroutines, but changes nonetheless. He'd modified emergency response protocols, adjusted timing sequences, and altered the feedback mechanisms that allowed workers to signal problems before they became critical. When I ran projections on his modifications, they didn't improve anything. If anything, they introduced potential failure points. The changes were subtle, but systematic, designed to create exactly the kind of cascading failures that would make the whole system look unstable under stress. I printed out the change logs and spent the rest of the night cross-referencing them against system performance data. Every modification Bryce had made created a vulnerability. Remove the operator override on Unit 3's pressure relief. Disable the manual backup for the leak detection system. Reduce the timing buffer on emergency shutdowns from 90 seconds to 45 seconds. Individually, none of these changes would cause a catastrophic failure. But together, during peak processing loads, they would create a perfect storm. The system would fail, and it would look like my original design couldn't handle the stress. I confronted him the next morning in his office. "Bryce, I noticed some alterations to the core safety protocols. Can you walk me through the reasoning?" He didn't miss a beat. Just some minor calibrations based on the latest performance data. Nothing that changes your fundamental approach, just optimizing the execution. He pulled up a presentation I'd never seen. "I've been tracking some metrics that suggest we can push efficiency gains even higher." The presentation was impressive. Charts, graphs, projections showing 32% improvement over baseline. Problem was, the data didn't match what I was seeing on the floor. Some of the metrics he was citing didn't even exist in our tracking systems. Others were extrapolated from single data points or based on theoretical maximums that ignored real-world constraints. Where did these numbers come from? Predictive modeling based on industry benchmarks and system capacity analysis. Bryce clicked through slides with the confidence of someone who'd never had to explain a refinery explosion to 180 grieving families. The algorithms show significant headroom for improvement if we can eliminate some of the current bottlenecks. By bottlenecks, he meant the safety protocols and human oversight systems that prevented disasters. That's when I realized what was happening. Bryce wasn't trying to improve my project. He was setting it up to fail in a way that would make his solution look necessary. His modifications would cause system conflicts during peak processing periods, create blind spots that would look like design flaws, generate false alarms that would make the whole thing seem unstable. When the project crashed, he'd be there with his improved version, ready to save the day with a fully automated system that didn't require people like me to understand it. Winston would get his modern technology-driven solution. Bryce would get his promotion. And I'd be the old-timer whose outdated approach couldn't handle the demands of modern refining. The beauty of it was that I'd given him everything he needed. The system access, the technical documentation, even the credibility that came from working under my authority. He'd studied my work just long enough to know where to break it. I started building my defense that same night. First thing was backing up all my original algorithms to a personal server, complete with timestamps and change logs that would prove what I'd built versus what Bryce had modified. Then I started having quiet conversations with key people about what they had observed. Pete Donovan, our maintenance chief, confirmed what I suspected. Bryce has been asking about equipment tolerance limits. What happens if systems get pushed beyond design specs? Says he needs to understand failure modes for risk management. Pete paused, adjusting his hard hat. But Wade, those aren't risk management questions. Those are sabotage questions. He wants to know exactly how much stress it takes to break something. Diana Walsh from the union had her own concerns. He's been inquiring about grievance procedures, asking how quickly we can replace operators if there are performance issues during the transition. Talking about bringing in temporary contractors who are more adaptable to new systems. Diana's been fighting for workers here longer than I've been in management. She understands power and how it really works. Wade, he's planning to blame the operators when his changes fail. Rick Coleman, who runs our safety inspection contracts, had the most damaging information. Bryce contacted me directly about modifying some of the safety protocols in our service agreements. Wanted to know if we could streamline some of the redundancy systems to improve efficiency. I told him any changes had to go through you first. Rick and I go back 12 years. His company services half the refineries in the region. He didn't like that answer. Started asking about replacing our inspection contract with a company that would be more flexible about safety standards. The picture was getting clearer. Bryce wasn't just planning to sabotage my algorithms. He was systematically removing every safety net, every human oversight system, every relationship-based quality control that made the operation actually work. When the inevitable failures happened, he'd blame outdated systems, resistant workers, and unrealistic safety requirements. Then he'd implement his solution. A fully automated system with minimal human input, streamlined safety protocols, and inspection contracts that prioritized cost over reliability. It would look great in quarterly reports right up until someone got seriously hurt or we had a catastrophic failure. But here's what Bryce didn't understand about military training. In the Navy, when you suspect sabotage, you don't just defend. You gather intelligence, you build alliances, and you prepare for war. I'd been walking these units for 28 years, checking pressure gauges, listening to equipment sounds, building trust with people who knew how things really worked. Bryce had been here 4 months with a tablet and an MBA. Jorge Santos pulled me aside during the evening shift change. "Captain, that college boy's been asking me about override procedures. Wants to know how to disable the manual controls on the distillation units. Says it's for security purposes, prevent unauthorized adjustments." Jorge's eyes were worried. "But Captain, those manual overrides are what save our asses when the automation goes crazy. Why would he want to disable them?" "Because he wants the automation to go crazy, Jorge. And when it does, he wants to make sure nobody can stop it." Lisa Morgan approached me the next day with her own concerns. "Wade, Bryce scheduled a meeting with the EPA compliance team without telling you. They're coming next week to review the environmental monitoring protocols. He told them we've identified some potential improvements to the reporting systems." I felt my jaw tighten. The EPA compliance was perfect. We'd had 0 violations for 8 months. The only reason to bring in EPA reviewers was if you wanted to create problems where none existed. "Lisa, I need you to document everything. Every conversation with Bryce, every question he's asked, every suggestion he's made. Can you do that for me?" "Already doing it. Wade." Rosa told us to start keeping records 2 weeks ago. We figured something was wrong when he started asking about disabling safety interlocks. That's when I knew I wasn't fighting this alone. My crew was watching my back, just like in the Navy. The question was whether we could stop Bryce's sabotage before it killed someone. 1 week before the final rollout, I got called into a board meeting. Winston was there along with Bryce and 2 executives I didn't recognize from corporate. They had charts and presentations ready, which told me this wasn't going to be a discussion. "Wade, we appreciate everything you've built here," Winston started. "The improvements have been significant. However, we've identified some concerns about the sustainability of your approach." Bryce took over, clicking to his first slide. "The systems Wade designed work, but they're essentially black boxes. If something goes wrong, only he can fix them. That creates unacceptable risk for a multi-million-dollar operation. We need more transparent, standardized protocols." He walked through his presentation methodically, charts showing my algorithms as overly complex, graphs demonstrating how my approach created dangerous single points of failure, risk assessments that painted my reliance on operator feedback as subjective decision-making that compromised consistency. Every concern they raised was manufactured. Every risk they identified was created by Bryce's modifications. But they had corporate buzzwords, colorful charts, and the confidence that comes from never having to explain a safety failure to real people. "We think it's best if I take operational control for the final implementation phase," Bryce concluded. "Wade can stay involved in a consulting capacity, but we need someone with fresh eyes managing the day-to-day execution." I sat there watching my own project get stolen in real time. The 2 corporate executives nodded along like they understood what they were voting on. Winston looked relieved to finally have someone speaking his language. Bryce looked confident, professional, ready to take charge. "What exactly are you planning to change?" I asked. "Nothing fundamental," Bryce assured me. "Just some efficiency optimizations and risk mitigation protocols. The core of what you built remains intact." That was a lie, and we both knew it. But the decision was already made. They handed me a revised org chart with Bryce as lead operations director, and my name moved to senior technical advisor, consulting role. No system access, no direct authority, just valuable input when requested. They locked me out that afternoon. Security badge deactivated, system account suspended, even my parking spot reassigned. "Temporary measure," they said, "just while we transition operational authority." Bryce walked me to my truck. All fake sympathy and professional courtesy. "Don't take this personally. Wade, your work here has been incredible. We just need to ensure continuity going forward. He paused at my driver's door. Get some rest. You've earned it. I drove home and spent the evening staring at my backup servers, looking at 28 months of work that was about to get twisted into someone else's victory. But as I sat there, something shifted in my thinking. They could lock me out of the office, but they couldn't lock me out of the relationships I'd built. The trust I'd earned with workers, vendors, and union representatives didn't get transferred just because they changed my title on an org chart. That's when I started making calls. First call was to Rosa. They locked me out, I told her. Bryce is running the show now. Her response was immediate. That's insane. He doesn't know half of what you built. Hell, he doesn't know a quarter of it. Doesn't matter. He's got corporate backing and a fancy presentation. Wade, listen to me. This place runs on relationships, not presentations. People trust you. They don't know Bryce from Adam, and they sure don't trust him with their lives. Second call was to Diana. They can lock you out of the office, she said. They can't lock you out of people's trust. You know what happens when Bryce's modifications start causing problems? People are going to call you, not him, and when they do, we'll be ready. Third call was to Rick. They've got a new guy running my project now, Bryce Hoffman. He might be calling about safety modifications. You recommending him? I'm not recommending anything. Just letting you know there's been a change in management. Rick understood immediately. In our business, personal recommendations matter more than corporate org charts. Trust gets earned over years and lost in minutes. Bryce might have Winston's authority, but he didn't have anyone's confidence. That was yesterday. Today, the whole refinery ground to a halt, because Bryce's modifications created exactly the system failures I knew they would. The overnight processing run hit the first cascade failure at 3:47 a.m. By morning shift, nothing worked. I stayed home, let my phone go to voicemail. Bryce called 11 times, Winston called 8 times, corporate called 4 times. Rosa called once with a status update, and I took that one. It's a complete mess, she said. Bryce is running around with printouts trying to figure out why the systems are rejecting the processing schedules. The modified protocols are conflicting with the equipment firmware. Operators are standing around getting paid to do nothing because nobody can tell them what's safe to do. What's Bryce saying? That it's a temporary integration issue that will be resolved shortly. Problem is, his modifications broke the diagnostic routines too. The system can't even tell us what's wrong, let alone how to fix it. Rosa paused. Wade, people are scared. They're asking if the refinery is going to shut down, if they should be looking for other jobs. I hung up and drove to the diner across from the facility. Same booth by the window where I used to eat lunch during the construction phase. Perfect view of the main gate and the loading terminals. By 10 a.m., it was chaos. Delivery trucks backed up down the highway because receiving couldn't process incoming crude oil. Finished products sitting in storage because shipping couldn't access the inventory database. The night shift supervisor was out in the parking lot chain smoking and talking on his phone, probably explaining to his wife why he might be late getting home. Workers were gathering in small groups near the employee entrance. I recognized most of them. Jorge Santos from Unit 7 looking worried. Lisa Morgan from Environmental Compliance, shaking her head at whatever someone was telling her. These weren't just employees to me. They were people I'd worked with for years, people whose expertise had made my project possible. My crew, then the call I was waiting for came. Winston sounding nothing like the confident executive from yesterday's meeting. Wade, we need to talk. There are some technical issues with the rollout that require your input. I'm not involved in operations anymore. Remember, this is temporary, just until we stabilize the systems. What systems? I don't have access to any systems. A pause. In the background, I could hear alarms shouting, the sound of expensive equipment sitting idle. We can restore your access temporarily. Emergency authorization. I let that sit for a moment. What kind of emergency? Processing has been down for 12 hours. We're losing $80,000 per hour in missed deliveries. Bryce says the issues are related to some legacy protocols that weren't properly documented. Legacy protocols. That's what they were calling my work now. Bryce made modifications to the core safety algorithms without understanding the interdependencies. The failures aren't bugs. They're features of his changes. Another pause. Can you fix it? That was the question I'd been waiting for. Not will you help us? Not what would you recommend, but can you fix it? Because they already knew that I was the only one who could. Maybe. I'd need full system access, operational authority, and a written guarantee that no one makes changes without my approval. Done. How quickly can you be here? I'm not sure I want to be there. Bryce has got this handled. Right, fresh eyes, modern approach, all those industry best practices. The silence stretched long enough that I could hear background noise from the control room. More alarms, someone shouting instructions that nobody was following. Wade, please, just get here. I finished my coffee and drove across the street. The security guard who'd been instructed to keep me out yesterday waved me through without checking my badge. Funny how emergencies clarify priorities. The next 14 hours were the longest of my career. Not because the fixes were complicated, but because I had to undo all of Bryce's improvements while explaining to him why each change was necessary. Every modification had created cascading failures throughout the system. He'd treated the refinery like a computer program that could be optimized with better code, not realizing that petroleum processing is a complex system where human judgment prevents disasters. By the end of the week, we were running at 112% of baseline efficiency. The workers relaxed. The supervisors stopped looking stressed, and the loading terminals returned to their normal organized chaos. The board meeting happened the following Tuesday. Different tone this time. Winston started with an apology and ended with an offer. Regional Safety Director, 28% salary increase, direct report to corporate, and oversight authority for 6 refineries across the Gulf Coast. Bryce got reassigned to Safety Systems Analyst reporting directly to me. Learning opportunity, they called it. I accepted both offers. For the next 8 months, Bryce worked under my supervision, learning what refinery safety actually involves. He turned out to be a decent analyst once he stopped trying to revolutionize everything. The best revenge isn't watching someone fail. It's being so essential that their failure becomes impossible to ignore. Then using that leverage to build something better, they didn't just lock me out of my project. They locked themselves out of competence. When I came back, it wasn't as the guy who saved the day. It was as the guy they couldn't afford to lose again. That's the kind of victory that lasts. In the end, they thought they were replacing me with someone cheaper and more compliant. What they actually did was replace competence with ambition, and discover that ambition without knowledge is just expensive ignorance. The real lesson isn't about workplace politics or corporate betrayal. It's that true expertise can't be stolen, only earned. And when you try to shortcut that process, reality has a way of demanding payment with interest.